very much. I appreciate seeing you all here again. For those of you who are local, I have an announcement that Ejum is going to defend his dissertation tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If you want to come in and hear us put him through the paces and torture him a little bit, you'll see what suffering really is. I invite you to come, coming to the end of his career as a student in our department. Well, I wanted to talk a bit more about some of the aspects of emptiness that we've not been covering so far, which is trying to look at it from the point of view of doctrine rather than some of the issues. Tomorrow, which is the last lecture, I am just going to play around a little bit. So, have a little fun with some of the things, just to remind myself about emptiness and to maybe remind some of you about some of the issues that we face in everyday life in terms of emptiness. So don't expect a great intellectual experience tomorrow, but maybe a little bit more fun. We started off by saying that in the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara, having had the experience of seeing that all the skandhas, that is the centurion, if you will, were empty, once having seen that, passed beyond all suffering. And that really is the main message about emptiness. The reason for studying and trying to experience emptiness is not just an exercise, or it's not just an intellectual exercise for the Buddhist. It has a very spiritual component to it. And that's why I have said to you that understanding our experience is the beginning point of a basis for enlightenment. And that if we have to start there, and that's why the courses that I've outlined for you in these last 2 weeks started with all of that, because I think that's the way the texts read. And now we come to the point where we try to look at what is the result of all that effort to see things as they really are, to understand the nature of the sensorium. We've also said that our direct experience of all phenomena is empty of any independent existence. That our direct experience, where we see and taste and touch and think even, that none of that has an independent existence any more than anything else. We have talked about things that arise together. Yesterday, the rising together and the causal connection of rising together and the correlation is that you can never have any of these experiences that we talk about with the senses or with the mind or with thought or process. You can have none of that as an independent existence. They are all arising in co-joined with other things. So what you're aiming for at one level is, according to the text, nirvana. Now, of course, some people say, well, Mahayana didn't want to go to nirvana, but they still talk about nirvana, and the Buddha had nirvana while he was still alive even, so it is definitely a part of the tradition. And even in the Prajnaparamita, which is a Mahayana text, what does it tell us? That the Bodhisattva is the perfection of wisdom. The perfect wisdom of emptiness, I'm sorry. It gives us a true metaphor. The Bodhisattva is, it doesn't say he's like. says he is. And why? Because his mind has no hindrance. And if there's no hindrance, there's no fear. He's not just fantasizing. He is dwelling in nirvana. This is nirvana with remainder. This is the kind of nirvana the Buddha had under the Bodhi tree. The Bodhisattva has that type of nirvana. And it's the hindrances of the mind. If you'll think back to the lecture where we were talking about vacuums, the vacuum is needed to clear out all the hindrances. That's why a vacuum is needed by science in order to really do some experiments. You got to clear the space. And in many ways, that's what meditation does for the mind, that the hindrances that are built in there somehow have to be pulled out of it so that there are no hindrances and that there is direct experience and there's directness without the hindrances. We're also told in the sutra, because all the Buddhas of the three times practice the wisdom of emptiness, they gain complete and perfect enlightenment. In other words, the promises that the texts make about emptiness are all connected with the spiritual growth and development of the people. That it's emptiness which allows people to have enlightenment. It is truly the basis for enlightenment in terms of what these texts are telling us. And that's why we should spend time thinking about it, because it is the basis for enlightenment, not just because it's interesting. So I decided to approach it from the point of view of saying, what is the path of a bodhisattva? And again, the texts tell us that what we're looking for is a transformation of our consciousness, and that the distinction between ourselves and others, we transcend them. And it's in that transcendence that the texts tell us we experience things as they really are, which is a kind of absolute reality. So I'm trying to lead us today to talk about this. So I'd like to map the journey. As you know, I'm a kind of map freak, and I'm always working with atlases. So what is the map if you want to do this? You want to take this journey down the road to have all of these experiences. We need a GPS. Basically, it's too complicated without a map. So I tried to think, where is the best map for that journey? And I decided that the best map that I know are the 10 bhumis of a bodhisattva. These 10 stages of a bodhisattva's development, in one sense, are just a map and a procedure through which we can gain them. Now, I'm going to explain them in a somewhat strange and different way, I suspect. I finally felt, in an interesting way, that I understood the 10 bhumis because of my visits to prison. I would never have expected that that's where the map would become real to me. But it has helped me see this map in a way which I had never really seen it before. So I'm going to make reference to my prison experience as we go through it. The initial stage is great joy. That you start this journey with joy. You would think that that might be the final, but it's the starting point. And it comes about by knowing that persons and things have no substantial being. As I've watched the people in the prison who practice meditation, the thing that had struck me so much was when I have gone in and talked to them, to see joy on the faces of some of them. Surprising to me. You wouldn't expect to see it. And when I talk to them, and I don't ask them directly, but you don't want to say, hey, you're in this terrible situation, you shouldn't be happy. But to listen to them talk, that when they start meditating, almost inexplicably to themselves, one of the first things that they feel from meditation, as they all express it, is they have a sense of joy. When they told me that, I thought, my gosh, that's the 10 bhumis of a bodhisattva. The first stage is joy, and that people ought to feel that sense of joy if they start to practice and to meditate. And they seem to have it, of all the people that I run into. So, emptiness. Is it the bodhisattva's path, or is it not the bodhisattva path? Emptiness as such, of course, like everything I've been always trying to say to you, things can be really positive or they can be really negative. There is no essence to anything. That's what we've been saying. If that's true, then it says you can't say emptiness is all good and you can't say emptiness is all bad. You cannot give it any of those categories because it can be both. The potential is always there. You can have the negative as well as the positive. So stage 2, perfect purity. For this one, it's like meditation has to give you the vacuum. You gotta suck and get rid of a lot of those hindrances that we talked about. You have to try to get to the zero function. What's the zero function? That's where you have all potential. You can go to any number from the zero function. So that the ground of being with all the virtues and all the properties of Buddhahood, how do we have it? Part of it is this perfect purity doesn't mean I'm a really good person. That's not what they're talking about. The purity here is you've been pulling out the stuff, and what you have is the meditative vacuum, as I'm calling it, where you've got it's pure. It's not filled with a lot of things. So we come to Tathagata. You know, there's been a big battle over this word. What does Tathagata mean? In Sanskrit, it doesn't tell you precisely what it means because it's how you read it. You could read it as thus come, or you could read it as thus gone. And I think the Buddhists left it both ways. The Chinese translated it as thus come. That was their translation. But in the Sanskrit, sometimes it's looked at the other way. So we're not sure. I was thinking, somebody asked me about the cosmic tug of war, that is, what's attracting us? What's causing this universe of ours to speed through space towards something? And what is the pushback against it? And it is the fact that for the Buddhist, I think they had this idea that a Buddha is both coming and going, and that the coming and the going have to be together. That you have the same thing that we talked about with gravity. It's at the same moment that something is falling away from, something else is coming toward it. That you can't have just coming. You've got coming, you've got going. Something is going if something is coming. We have this all the time. So if a Buddha comes, the Buddha also goes, in one sense. If whatever we have, it's got pushback. It's constantly there. So I like the fact that the word can't be absolutely determined. I think that's good, because I think it's more realistic. Third stage. The problem that people face is the darkness, the hindrances. We have to deal with the fact that we've got this darkness. Certainly I learned this from the prisoners. They were all saying they had to face the darkness in their life. That they could have the joy, and they could even begin to see that things were empty, if you will. But still there was a deep darkness in them, because they felt so much guilt. They said, I did this, whatever thing it was I did. I've let down my family. In some cases, I've let down my children. And I have this dark cloud that's over me. But when they begin to meditate, then it's like this stage of luminosity comes. There's like something shows at the end of this darkness for them. So we all know about light, and the question is that it's like matter and antimatter. They come together. Light is only possible in a way because of darkness. I mean, the two of them are constantly in flow with each other. And in this meditative mapping of what people have to do, we've all got our darkness. We have our dark sides. We're not all perfect. We know our dark sides probably better than anybody else in the world knows them, maybe. We have our depressions. We have our sadnesses. We have all of those things are part of our lives, whether we want them or not, they are there. So luminosity is that even in the deepest meditation, our habits are still with us. In other words, in this mapping, nobody is living a life of, hey, if you just start meditating, you'll get rid of everything right away. No, I'm sorry. The map says we carry our habits with us for a very long time. And to get away from those habitual ways of thinking and acting is really an enormous step. We struggle with it. So the Buddhists say it's only by practicing the 10 perfections that you can begin to get away from these habitual impressions that are in the brain, in the mind, and that just dominate our lives. We're dominated by them still. So when I hear the prisoners talk about darkness and hindrances, I really feel them. Of anybody I've ever met, I feel it from them more strongly because they've got it in spades. They have done horrible things, many of them. They're in a horrible situation in many ways. The darkness in their life is so real to them that it becomes real to me. And I realize it's just like we try to study something by looking at the worst example of it. It's like medicine. If you want to study a disease, you want to find the worst case of that disease you can so you can really see it in its full-blown thing. With darkness and hindrance, I tell you, it's very wonderful in some sense to be able to see it so clearly. And it's horrible at the same moment. And to realize that that darkness is something we all have. The Buddhists recognize it. How are we ever to get away from it? How are we ever to pull ourselves away from that kind of darkness, which is the hindrances that have filled our minds or filled our spirits. Angers, hates, old memories, all of the stuff that we hang on to. It was interesting, after my last prison visit, I was talking to the Christian chaplain, and he said, wanted to know, he said, I have heard that the following expression is a Buddhist one. Can you tell me if it's so? The expression is to eat poison so you can kill your enemy. And I had to tell him, no, that's not really a Buddhist statement. Nobody really knows where it comes from. It's very good. That is, if we are filled with anger toward our enemy, and we think that having that anger in us is going to do damage to the enemy, think again. It's doing the damage to us. But the Buddhists do have one. They say you can't pick up cow dung and throw it at somebody without getting your hand dirty first. The first person to get covered with it when you pick it up is you. So I told the chaplain, the Buddhists don't seem to have done that other statement, but they have in the Visuddhimagga, this one. You can't pick it up without getting it. You're the one that gets it first. So we have to figure out from this darkness and the hindrances, the fact that they do such damage to us. And that darkness is not good for us. And if we're holding on to it, it's even worse for us. It eats away at us. So I like this statement that if you keep on eating poison, anger, in order to kill your enemy, it won't work. So we have this brain habit, and we have memory. The Greeks had a goddess for everything, or a god. And they had the goddess of memory. So we use it for, we call it mnemonic devices. A mnemonic device is when you want to remember something, you match it with something else so that you can always remember somebody's name. So if their name is Drake, you think, a duck. That's and you've got a mnemonic device. The name is Drake. The mnemonic device, and we realize this, that in our receptors, there are forms of memory. And it is possible for us to construct, as we now begin to see, it is possible to actually shift the structure of the brain in its functions. You're not physically changing that white matter up there, but you're changing the functions. And you make neural pathways that become more and more developed as you practice, so that habit can be both good and bad. If we practice the same thing, like anger toward our enemies, for a very long time, we're putting a deep rut in our brain habit, and that's where our brain's going to go every time it happens. It's like, I feel that when I'm driving on the freeway and see road rage. It's like road rage just comes to people because they have so imbued themselves with this kind of habit that all it takes is some little tiny thing from somebody else, and immediately their brain gives them a huge jolt of anger, and it comes out. It's dangerous, very dangerous to me. But that says they have pushed that to the point. So, as I mentioned before, athletes know that if they practice correctly the same thing over and over and over, they will get to the point where they can really do it in the athletics. But if they practice the same thing over and over that is slightly wrong, then they're going to be looking for a new contract from somebody else because they're going to lose it. I think all of us are this way. we have to ask ourselves the question with this one. What issues do we continually practice in ourselves that are the darkness? Is it envy? Is it anger? Is it greed? What is it? We all know we have all of these. We all have these negative things. And if we practice them constantly, by golly, the brain says, I like this. I'm gonna really channel so that this is what's gonna come up, and I feel this need to grasp or whatever. On the other hand, if we begin, according to this, to work away on those habits and the darkness of those habits with the insights and beginning to think in terms of some of the issues of what emptiness is, then the other should result from it. Stage 4, glowing wisdom. In this one, there has to be no attachment to self-belief, self-conceit, even meditation or teaching. One of the things that all the prisoners have said to me is, the reason meditation works for us so well, we think, is we stop being so focused on ourselves. And they say, many of them say, I grew up just thinking about myself. Many of them are smarter than the people on the outside. Their smartness didn't do them any good. They learned how to manipulate. They learned how to get everything that they wanted by hook or crook, as we say. And to begin to give that up is really hard. And most of us out in the outside world, I think we have a hard time doing that, because we're faced every day with our job or with our work or with people who are coming at us, and our ego is just right out there in front of us all the time, and we feel it. In there, when they're in that situation, I've watched them, and I can see that they do, in fact, some of them, give up a lot of their ego. And it shows itself in the fact that they begin to help each other. Generally in the prison, prisoners don't help each other. They don't trust one another. They say, look, this place is full of bad people. I just have to try to survive. That's all I have to do in this place, is just survive. And I have to protect myself against all the stuff that comes at me. So I can't trust anybody. In these meditation groups, they begin to find trust. And I can't tell you what it means to them to find it, because they don't have it anyplace else in their life. And it allows them to be a little less egocentric. And so they start helping one another, to the amazement of the warden, to the amazement of the prison guards, and to the amazement of the other prisoners. But it is, in one sense, when I watch what they start doing at a very low level, in one sense, just to be able to say to somebody, I know you had bad news, and I'm really sorry, brother. And they call each other brother. Well, to have somebody who actually acknowledges that you've got problems, and that they're willing to step forward and give you a hug and say, I'm sorry that you're in this boat. For them, it's an enormous step. We don't see it so clearly, what glowing wisdom is. We don't see it, but it's like that dawn of the light that they're beginning to have, and it expresses itself in this lack of attachment to their own needs, to their own egos, to what they have to do. Fifth stage. The fifth stage is overcoming the most difficult barrier that we face. So they call it the mastery of difficulties. And the most difficult thing is to see two truths at once. To see that there is the worldly truth of where we live every day, and that there is a transcendent truth which is quite different from what we are living in our everyday life. And sometimes we can have one, so I can go meditate, and maybe for a little bit I have the transcendent, that's fine. And as I told you, when I started meditating first time, I'd get a little bit of that, and then I'd drive on the LA freeway and lose it before I got home. I could never get it home. The mastery of the difficulties was beyond me. I couldn't master it. I couldn't hold on to it. So mainly I live in the worldly one. That's where I live most of the time. To be able to somehow, at the same time I'm living in that, to see that there is another truth, there is another, a wider view, there is a transcendence, is very difficult. So when I see a prisoner, again talking about the prisoners, when I see a prisoner who says, I'm in here for life, I will never get out, I know that. I will never get out. But I can still have something. I can still have something. And that something is a kind of feeling of transcendence where you transcend this prison wall. And they really tried to find it. One of the people that I first met said, why are you here? This is such bad people. There's nothing here for you. Don't do it. Go out there and help good people. Don't come in here and try to help these bad people. They're not worth it. We're not worth it. We've been abandoned by our families, so why are you here? In a sense, go away. It was like really, they speak truth to you. There's no filter. They tell you exactly what, because what are they going to lose anymore? As time went by, over the years, I watched him, and he finally said to me one day that he had decided that whatever his karma was, that part of this overcoming in this mastery of difficulties for him, the mastery of being in this situation for the rest of his life, is that he decided to become a prison bodhisattva. And he helps every prisoner. I mean, this guy is so busy all day long, and they all come to him now. They flock to him. They moved him out of prison that he was in because they put him in a less secure prison. But it's very interesting, the yard that he was in is still the most active meditating group of any of the ones. His presence is still there with them. They feel it. He left behind this mastery of the difficulties that he was in to such a degree, they still talk about him. And for him, he's going on to another prison. He's already beginning to organize people in that one. But boy, when you talk about mastery of difficulties, that to me is a difficulty that I can't even imagine how you could have mastery over it and live at the same time in a prison world for your life, but with a sense of transcendence. So in the Tendai school, they say a fully enlightened mind sees three levels of truth. truth of emptiness, the truth of phenomena, and the truth of the middle way. This is a little bit like overcoming the darkness, with the middle way as the transcendent. So I can think that everything is empty. I can understand the nature of essence and all of that. It's a kind of intellectual thing. I can understand that everything that I see is going to change and going to fall to pieces. I can see all of that. And somehow I have to find a place in between that so I can keep on going. That I really need to be able to live with it. If I say I just have an intellectual understanding of it, or if I just have an emotional understanding, I still gotta live in the world, with the world, whatever my world is. And in the case of the prisoners, the world is the prison. And of all the things, they have to somehow figure out, how can I live with this? What's so sad to me is that for 20-year-olds, the suicide rate is very high. They can't find that place. When they think about being in there for 30 or 40 years, they just say, forget it. I can't make that transcendence. So that, in one sense, what we are faced with is that this happens to people outside of prison too. They just can't deal with it. They can't find this place. But it's a part of the map. So we have Indra's net, many within the one. Our awareness is being dominated by phenomena. But in a sense, we have to ask whether or not, as one of the texts says, that it's a kind of expression of a wider self. Universal may not be the right word, but that's what the text seems to say. We have to get outside of ourselves while being inside ourselves. We have to stay very much inside, but we've also got to figure out how to be bigger than just ourselves. Sixth stage, always present, maybe better than eternal. This one is seeing that everything that we see out there, and this one is hard to deal with, are our own self-appearance. How can that be? It says none of our experience of the external world can be apart from our own brain, our own mind. Everything which we are seeing out there, so-called, in fact is all in here. We are experiencing it totally within ourselves. Whatever the external world is, we don't know, but boy, when I experience it, it's all in here. So what I see is, in many ways, my self-appearance. From the prisoners, when they first start in prison, they don't trust anybody, because when they see all those people, they say they're all evil, they're bad. They see reflected in those people their own darkness. So they know what it's like to be really bad. They know what it's like to be heartless. They really know that in ways that a lot of us will, I hope, never know. And so there comes a point at which they realize to some degree that they have to pull back that projection and recognize that what they're looking at is themselves. So when people and it's true for me, if I find somebody doing something that I don't like in myself, I hate to see it in others. But the other side of this is to recognize if you see something which you really admire, you have to realize that you admire it because it's part of you. In other words, it's not just that I hate to see my flaws in another person because it's too close to home, but we also have to give ourselves some credit. When we admire and when we like something, we need to understand that it is because it's a projection of part of us that we can do that. We are, in a sense, admiring ourselves in a good way. We see kindness in somebody and we say, that really moves me. Why does it move us? It's because that's part of us. We are seeing something of ourselves in that kindness because we have it. So we have to understand ourselves in a positive light as well. And I think that this constant presence is something that by this sixth stage, one begins not only to see problems, but one begins to see some of the positive things as well. So, the sixth bhumi, great wisdom, means the insight into the true nature of all phenomena. And that's why I love to look at physics. I love to look at cognitive science. I feel for Buddhists, they should love it too. That we need insight into the true nature of everything. And if science helps provide that, good. But let's look at what that offers to us. It doesn't have to be everything that we know about a thing, but it's certainly a way of seeing. So when the Higgs boson comes along, I'm really thrilled. I love it. And I think, aha, I've got another little insight into the true nature of matter. And that's what great wisdom ought to be, is this constant growing insight into the true nature. I want to know about myself. So if I deal with psychological insights that come, I have the same feeling of, I really want to know this. This psychological insight tells me something about the true nature of what's going on around me. And I want to take that in. Same with biology, same with my body, same with medical science. It all, whether it's psychological or physical, having this insight into the true nature of everything is a part of the Enlightenment experience. It is part of the map of a bodhisattva. So I love it that the Dalai Lama wants to work with science. And he really does. If he wasn't the Dalai Lama, I'm convinced he would be a scientist. If he was in another situation, and I think he sometimes said that maybe in the next life he'd like to be reborn as a scientist and not as a monk, whatever his life is going to be like. I think I've told you the story when one of his first times at Berkeley, we were trying to prepare for him, and so we talked to there's a group that comes and works with you before he comes, and we were saying, what do you think he would like? We have all these wonderful Tibetan books. And they looked at us with kind of pitying, because the number of Tibetan books we have at the Berkeley Library compared to what the Dalai Lama's library has are nothing. He doesn't need to look at another Tibetan book in his whole life. He's seen them all. So though they said, he wants to see the cyclotron. Well, that's a military lab at the Berkeley campus, which I can't go into because I don't have clearance. None of us have clearance. However, from Washington, they gave him clearance. They took him in. But all of us who were helping him on the campus had to stay out. We couldn't go in. But they let him in. He was thrilled, because it was like insight into the true nature of all phenomena. That's what he saw in that building. He was in his sixth mumi, really, that day, and he loved it. So, beginning to see our self-nature is the beginning of enlightenment. To understand what we're really like, that's part of this whole journey. That's part of the map. Who am I? What am I really like? It's sometimes very hard to determine. We're sometimes too hard on ourselves, and we're sometimes too blinded to look at ourselves. We have both of these constantly besetting us. But to the degree that I can understand my true self-nature as being empty, in one sense, as being something that I have to transcend in another, but as something which I really have to see. I can't ignore it. It never asks me to ignore anything in this map. It says to have insight and to see is the big issue. So in this one within the many, the mind really is in tune with the true nature of everything, with the emptiness. It's beginning to really register. Talk about that, but it finally is registering. That's what it means. Stage 7, far away. Far away is that dualism is suppressed. This and that are now so far away from each other that we recognize that they are not duality. They are not two sides of the same coin anymore. We pull all that duality apart and show it to be a sham from the beginning. It never was there in one sense. So the duality is taken away from us. It's like talking to the prisoners. Things are good, things are bad. People are evil, people are good. They go into prison and they finally say, I'm really evil. I mean, think what it's like to have to think that about yourself. That's really something. And I've been evil, truly evil. But to be able to recognize that, it is enormous growth on their part. So the dualism of the fact that once they begin to see, I did something really evil, but at the same time, I'm here. And that I began to see there's a part of me that's not evil. And I'm pulling them apart to be able to see my nature without it being always good, bad, evil, not evil. That I stop thinking in those dualistic terms and say, in a sense, we're all on a continuum. Where you are on the continuum, or any of us are on the continuum, we don't know exactly how to identify that. Because the continuum is endless, so you don't know where you are in an endless continuum. You're just on it. And so dualism won't work on an endless continuum. It just won't. So the awareness of body and mind as two different things drop away. And the thing I like is that emptiness is now the fullness of nature. It is the fullness of something. Emptiness means it's full of potential. When you've got an empty bag, the potential of what you put in it is wide open. Emptiness is always at one level, fullness of potential. So that we come to a deeper and deeper enlightenment on this mapping of a bodhisattva. Stage A. Not agitating, not vibrating. Unmoving is often translated. What does it mean to be unmoving? It says we become free of all of our projections. We have complete freedom to create and to modify. This is a stage which every inventor ought to reach. Every thinker ought to reach, where you're free of all the old images and you have the complete freedom to create and modify right now. I mean, that's what we need. That's why I say to people, we don't need problem solvers in this world. We need problem seekers. That's much more important to us. And the problem seekers are those who have the freedom to think about new things and to create, to modify. So I watch these prisoners, and some of them, like Bodhisattva prison Bodhisattva, he freed himself of all his old images of himself to some degree and said, who am I right now? Even in this environment, I have complete freedom to create and to modify my life and my relationship to others. I can do it right here in this environment. That to me is that unmoving, not vibrating, means the potential is there, and to sense it and to really begin to act on it is the way to go. Then stage 9, the highest insight. One begins to do things that you never thought you could do. That's why I always love the Shaolin monks. I love to watch them because I think it's impossible for somebody to do that. And yet, I just saw it. This person can do things that I can't even believe. I hate it when Hollywood movies make a movie where they don't show what they really can do. They make it a fake. And I think they make a grave error to do that, because if they would put on the best of them doing what they can really do, it would make such a powerful, much more powerful movie. It really would. But of course, movies aren't made that way. They're made to entertain. So if you can get to the place where you can just have something without any restrictions, you just remove those restrictions because you've got to the level of competence. It's like riding a bike. When you first start riding a bike, you try to hold it up, and it doesn't work. You can't hold up a bike. You have to let go and let it start to move on its own, and then you balance. And watching children learn to ride a bike, I watch them go through, in a sense, the Bodhisattva boomies. After a while, no hands. I don't even need my hands on the handlebar, because I've now become so proficient that I have almost no restrictions on me. And I watch these kids do these tricks with their boards where they go up in the air and they flip and turn. And that's it. You become so proficient that you can do things you never thought you could do. And that proficiency is almost seeming without any restriction. But suppose I could turn it on myself and live with the insights with such a lack of restriction that I could have this wisdom dealing with every single moment of my life. What would that be like? So that's why I like when somebody says about space. It contains everything, but it doesn't cling to anything. It's got it all there, but it doesn't cling to it. It's moving about, it's bouncing whatever way it wants to. It's okay. Space says, I don't need to contain you. I'm not clinging. And finally, stage 10, the Dharma cloud. Rain falls. Who does it fall on? Everyone. You don't choose who you fall, it's for everybody. To benefit all sentient beings. That's why I say to the Buddhists, do not try to do social service where you just service the poor and oppressed. That's not the Buddhist way. It's a dangerous path to take. What you say to everybody is, I serve all sentient beings. I'm a Dharma cloud. I rain on them all. And if I help the poor and oppressed, I help them not because they're poor and oppressed. I help them because they're like everybody else and have the needs of everybody else. They are not different. I don't degrade them. I don't make them subhuman somehow. So that the Dharma cloud, that's why they say, if a plant has small roots, it's going to only take up a little bit of the rainfall. If it's got big tree roots, it's going to take up gallons and gallons of the rain. It's the need of the people, and it's what they do with it, but I rain down on all of them. Some of the people that I've approached with prison work have said to me, I don't want to help bad people. I won't get as good karma if I give it to a bad person as I would giving it to a good person. The better the person is, the more karma, the better your karma. So I've accepted that. And so I've begun to say to them, you're not going to get much good karma out of this because they're very bad. You do it out of compassion. That's why you do it. Just out of compassion. You help somebody, you help all beings out of compassion. And you don't ask for anything else. You rain down on everybody. You never say, I'm not going to help that person. That person's rich. They don't need my help. Believe me, rich people need help too. I'm not going to help that person because they've committed a crime. Believe me, people who commit crimes need your help, need our help. So, future things that happen to us are going to keep on happening unless the cause of their production has been destroyed. I'm going to keep on hating or being angry or being envious until the moment when the cause for that I somehow handle. And how can I handle that cessation? Is when I recognize it's empty. I recognize the emptiness. I can begin to give it up and just say, it's not worth it. After a while, it just isn't worth it to do this to myself or to others. My wife has taught me a wonderful thing. If somebody gives you a really hard time and you're very angry at them or you wish, she tells me, when you go to bed at night, imagine giving that person a wonderful gift that is exactly what they want. And you know that's hard to do. There's a part of you that says, I don't want to give this person anything because they're being such wretches. I don't want to do it. But how can I bring about cessation until I've ceased to have the poison and say, okay, I'm going to give them the gift. They may not know they've gotten the gift, but somehow I suspect they do. Somehow I suspect. So what is nirvana? No origin, no production, no cessation, not subject to the law of impermanence. This is what the final nirvana is. It is a mental state which is not constructed. I'm not sure what that is, I have to tell you. I'm not that enlightened at all, so I can't help you with that. And we have Sheng-Yen, Venerable Sheng-Yen, I love to state that if there's a thought that I have achieved enlightenment, that I'm dwelling with the experience of emptiness, and that's also an attachment. It's like, oh shoot. I thought if I had this wonderful insight, now I'm enlightened. I've got the attachment. That too is an attachment. I have to give up even that. It's like I didn't realize how much I had to give up. So when it enters and emerges, so that the experience in samadhi is not unchanging, it's impermanent. And so finally for enlightenment, then they speak of the gateless gate. There's no door to it. There's no exact way to get there. The map won't take you there exactly, but it is a way to begin to deal with all the issues that we have. And as I look at the Bhumis, in this strange, strange way, I learned a lot about them from those teachers of mine in the prisons. I would never have anticipated or expected it. You would think I would have learned from my professors or from people who were in religious life. But instead, I had to learn it from these people in this extreme situation who have used Buddhism to somehow deal with it. And I really appreciate it. And thank you.